everyone and welcome to the Void Theater. As always, I'm your host Alexander, and in this video we have a very special episode because we're reviewing a legitimate icon of Adult Swim history, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, a show that for a lot of people either brings back good or terrible memories. It was a definitive point in Adult Swim's history, and at one point was the cartoon block's longest running show, only being beaten by Robot Chicken, another show from the channel that I'll cover at some point. But today we'll be more focused on a new movie that dropped apparently 3 months ago to no actual reception, Aqua Teen Hunger Force Plantasm. And let this be a lesson, kids. Streaming first, DVD sales later. But still, there's no denying this show's icon status. It was a show that prided itself on being as crass and unapologetically politically incorrect as it could be. But the question is, how does this hold up in 2023? Well, let's find out. So, without any further ado, let's raise the curtain and put this movie on stage and see if the Aqua Teens truly are forever. Alright, so the movie starts with the Aqua Teens fighting a Thing ripoff disguised as Carl aboard a spaceship. And as crazy as that sounds, that's actually pretty on brand for the show. There's no build-up, no explanation, it just kind of happens. So we're already off to a great start. The ship then explodes, and then the Moonanites cut the broadcast to tell us to suck it and that we're idiots for paying to see this movie. Which is a recurring joke in the film itself, and normally I wouldn't be a fan of this level of meta humor, but I gotta be honest, it works here for now. This is Aqua Teen's bread and butter. The show has always made jokes like this at the expense of the viewer. They once made an entire episode about getting a job to pay for cable, and then told the audience that they were stupid for paying for cable.
Out of your mind? You pay money for cable? You're stupid.
Like I said, this is a show that knows its audience and knows the type of humor it likes. But it turns out that the whole thing was just a fantasy that Master Shake made up to sound cool at a homeless shelter. And it's here that it's revealed that the Aqua Teens broke up. Again. For the third time in the series. But they all went their separate ways, with Meatwad sleeping in an animal shelter and Frylock working for an Amazon/Apple parody company. Meanwhile, Carl's getting off on the idea of finally selling his house. Like, literally getting off on it. Again, pretty par for the course here. It's a weird feeling, and I'll get into this later in the video, but a lot of these jokes just don't hit the same. It's not that they're bad, it's just that they feel different. But like I said, I'll address that later. Anyway, Frylock ends up becoming friends with the head of the company who wants to be taller, so he decides to clone him. But the clone takes over and fires the entire company workforce and replaces them with plant people. And halfway through this, we finally get to the Plantasm part of the movie title. By the way, the entire time, the Moonanites keep cutting in to trash talk the movie. It was funny the first time, but it wears on you the more they do it. But the whole movie is basically a parody of Amazon workplaces and labor unions mixed with a sci-fi movie, mixed with a superhero movie. And it ends with a giant plant fight. And then they win by blocking out the sun and killing all the plants and freezing New Jersey. Ending with the fired workers who then end up eating the Aqua Teens. And then the credits roll with the Moonanites still reminding you that you're an idiot for buying this movie. For the 7th time. And that's it. That's the entire movie. So let's break this down, because if I'm being honest, this movie is just so uneventful. It's not bad, but there's also nothing that makes me want to watch this movie again. So let's do this in the version of the good, the bad, and just the ugly. And we can start with the good, because despite what I just said about this movie, there are some genuinely good things that I think make this movie stand out. For one, the animation is honestly stellar. The main characters have never looked as fluid and clean as they have in this movie. I say this as someone who grew up watching this show. Way before I was supposed to, I might add, but I still watched it, and they've never looked this good. And not just in color, but in movement. If you've ever seen the original show, and I recommend it wholeheartedly if you haven't, but if you have, you'll remember that the animation, even for its time, always felt cheap. The movement was janky and stilted, and more often than not, if the characters didn't have to move, they just stood still. If it didn't add to the joke, no character was doing more than the bare minimum of movement. I have more movement when I change my stills than most of the characters did in the show. But now you can tell the creators wanted to put a much bigger focus on how the show looked, and here it shows. If there's anything you can take away from this movie, it's that the entire movie looks great from start to finish. As for the bad, well, for that we gotta talk about the humor of this film, cause it's everywhere. I'm gonna be 100% here, I don't think I laughed once throughout this entire movie. Smiled? Sure. Chuckled? Absolutely. Genuinely laughed? Couldn't tell you one time. And for a movie that has an hour and 15-minute runtime, it starts to get painful really quickly. Now don't get me wrong, this movie does have some solid jokes, but none of them land all that well. And the ones that do just feel outdated and tiresome. Going back to the Moonanites cutting into the movie, there's a rule in comedy called the rule of 3. After 3 times, the Joker bit becomes tiresome. The Moonanites cut into the movie a full 7 times, and each time it's the same joke, and each cut-in is about a minute of it, so it just gets annoying. They mock you for buying the movie, then they trash talk it, then either cut out, fast forward, or just delete chunks of it. It's like Mystery Science Theater, except it gets on your nerves after the first time. And then by the 3rd or 4th time, I was ready to turn the movie off and just go watch the original show. And that's the main takeaway here. The original show's humor just felt better. It had more bite in it. Was it crass? Absolutely. Like I said, the show prided itself on that. But it was also funny. And it wasn't just because it was crass, it was because there was also punchlines put into them. At no point in this movie did I ever feel like there was a joke beyond, look at this. And if I'm being honest, whatever I wanted you to look at wasn't that funny to begin with. But that also brings us to the ugly. And it's just the general plot of the movie. In case you thought I missed something in that tiny recap there, I didn't. That was barely a page of the summary, and it was all you needed to know about the movie. The plot is, at its best, generic, and at its worst, uninteresting. And that's its biggest offense. Because a comedy movie doesn't even need to have stellar jokes to succeed. The jokes can be alright as long as the plot or the scenarios are funny enough to carry it. But this doesn't even get that right. It's a generic story about a guy who ends up working at a tech company and becomes good friends with the owner, who later reveals is evil and is just using them for their own personal gain and is eventually brought down by their own hubris. Except, you want to hear a joke? Just now, I didn't summarize the Aqua Teen movie. I just gave you a summary of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. And I would argue that that movie is funnier than this one. Though, to be fair, I will admit that Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movies are heavily underrated. But a lot of this movie feels like when Rick and Morty try to tie in real-world figures to their adventures. In theory, it sounds good, like the joke with Elon Tusk, but in reality, it just doesn't work, like the joke with Elon Tusk. It's even weirder with this movie because they mention people like Elon Musk by name, but the company is a weird parody of Amazon with a character design from Modern Family Guy. That's not a joke, by the way. The main villain's design is literally just a shrunk version of that generic hipster character in Family Guy. But like I said, I could forgive this movie if it was at the very least interesting. But it's just not. It's dull. It's so unceremoniously dull that more often than not, I found myself checking the runtime on my phone just to see how much the movie was left. And the thing is that the movie feels like it wants to do some hardcore jokes, but for some reason, it's just scared of committing to them. There's a part near the end where Carl starts his rant talking about how soft America has gotten and talk about ogling women. It's dumb as hell, but for Carl it's in character with him being a piece of garbage. Then they just stop and move on with no real punchline, so the Moonanites can skip another part of the movie. It just comes off as clunky and unfinished, and I don't get why. We have plenty of shows that can do crass humor and get away with it. American Dad, Rick and Morty, and Family Guy have all done jokes like this without any fear of repercussions, so it makes you wonder what the issue was here. But if I'm being honest, I think the biggest issue here isn't even directly tied to the movie, it's tied to the show itself. Aqua Teen Hunger Force's comedy is directly tied to its runtime. That's why it worked best in a 15-minute format. The jokes and punchlines were quick and easy because they had to fit a designated runtime. And that runtime was just the right length for quick jokes that didn't need to be set up for a long punchline. But when you take that format of jokes and stretch them from 15 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes, you can start to see the cracks in the system. Honestly, it's the same reason I don't think a Rick and Morty movie could ever really work. I don't doubt Dan Harmon's writing skills, but the humor of the show works best in a 30-minute format, and Vindicators 2 kind of proved that it doesn't work with less time, so I can't imagine them making jokes stretch for over an hour. But in the end, this movie isn't bad, it's just forgettable. And normally I would give this movie a rating of 1 to 10, but you know what, I'm gonna borrow from another YouTube channel, and I'm gonna give it a rating on a scale of better than sex to a fuck you. So I'm gonna give this movie some old bullshit. Honestly, even if you have an hour and 15 minutes to spare, just go watch the original series. It's better in almost every way aside from animation quality. And like I said, I love a good comedy movie. I even love a bad comedy movie in the form of so bad it's good. But I can't stand a boring comedy movie. And that's what Aqua Teen Hunger Force Plantasm is. It's just boring and uneventful. Though I'll give this movie credit, I went into this ready to laugh and I left disappointed. Can't genuinely think of how many shows have done that to me. But that's going to be the current call for this review on Aqua Teen Hunger Force Plantasm. I honestly don't have much left to say other than I really wanted to like this movie. Like I said, I grew up on Aqua Teen, but this movie was honestly just exhausting to get through, and it makes me wonder if the new season is going to feel the same. But let me know what you think in the comments down below, and be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content. Until next time, I've been your host Alexander, and I hope to see you back in my theater.